السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. حكينا بالمحاضرة السابقة آخر إشي إنه how we can sketch graph of x. So if you given a function of x كان السؤال sketch a function of x. To sketch the function, the first step you must find the domain f x. Then you must find the horizontal asymptote, the behavior of the function when x approaches infinity and minus infinity. And then you find the intervals of increasing, decreasing, and the critical points. وهدول من خلال ال first derivative. And you must find the intervals of concavity. Now, for example, if you have the function of x equal x over x plus 1, you can find f prime of x, you get 1 over x plus 1 square, and f double prime lil x minus 2 over x plus 1 to the power 3. What is the domain for this function? The domain for f x هو عبارة عن r except minus 1. We want to sketch this graph. لاحظ إنه x equal minus 1 is a vertical asymptote. Why? If you take the limit as x approaches minus 1 from the right or from the left, الجواب infinity or minus infinity. And y equal 1 is a horizontal. Why? Since limit x over x plus 1 as x approaches infinity equal 1. So it will be a horizontal asymptote. Now, we want to study the sign for f prime x. This is f prime. If prime x does not equal 0, the sign of f prime always positive. That means f x increasing on its domain r except minus 1. There is no critical points, and no max and no minimum. Now, to find the intervals of concavity, study the sign for f double prime of x. F double prime lil x, the domain for the function r except minus 1. If you choose number greater than minus 1 like 0, so the sign, it will be negative. If you choose number less than minus 1 like minus 2 plus 1 minus to the power 3 negative, negative over negative positive. So we get f x concave up on the interval minus infinity minus 1, and f x concave down on the interval minus 1 infinity, and obvious there is no inflection point. We can't say minus 1 is inflection point since it is not included in the domain and the function of x is not continuous at this point. Now السؤال الأخير, sketch this function. We want to try to sketch of x. First of all, we draw the horizontal asymptote y equal 1 and the vertical asymptote x equal minus 1. Now, the behavior for the function when x less than minus 1, the function increasing and concave up, and it will be approaches y equal 1. So this function increasing and concave up. It will be approaches as x approaches minus infinity, it will be approaches the horizontal asymptote. And when x is greater than minus 1, what is the behavior for the function? It will be increasing and concave down. And the function intersect the x-axis at the point 0, 0. So the function will be passes through this point. So the behavior for the function when x is greater than minus 1, concave down and increasing. So this function concave down and increasing, and as x approaches infinity, the graph approaches y equal 1 and the limit for this function. As x approaches minus 1 from the right, الجراف عم بيروح لوين؟ للماينس infinity. To practice أكتر for irrational function, حاول إنك sketch the function of x equal x square over x square minus 1. Before you sketch and study the intervals of increasing, decreasing, first of all, domain f(x) is r except plus minus 1. Okay. Now we will start about, what do we mean about absolute maxima and minima? Absolute, we study the relative maximum and relative minimum for the function. Now, our aim in this lecture to define what do we mean about absolute maximum and minimum. والسؤال الثاني, how to find the absolute maximum and a minimum for a function of x. If you take the graph for this function of x, obvious from the graph this point a at x equal a, this value absolute maximum, it will be the largest one. This value, the largest one for the function of x. If we take the graph for g of x, obvious from the graph at this point a, this is the smallest value on the domain of this function. So since it is the smallest one, we call it absolute minimum for the function. لاحظ إنه this function has local max. This function has local max in this interval. This is local max. But the largest one in the interval, it will be the absolute max. If you take this function, obvious this function is continuous on R, but no max, no minimum, and no absolute max and no absolute minimum. If we define this function on a closed interval AB, on the interval A, B, so this point A FL A, and this point B FL B. If we define a function in a closed interval, it has absolute max and absolute minimum. So obvious, at this point absolute minimum and at this point absolute max. Okay, now definition. What do we mean absolute max and minimum? Consider an interval in the domain of a function f and a point x naught in that interval. يعني هاي الفانكشن، نفرض هاي البوينت ال A سميناها x naught، وهاي الكوردينات x naught f x naught. We say f has an absolute maximum at x naught if f x أقل أو تساوي f x naught for all x in the interval. لاحظ إنه f x naught هي أكبر وحدة f x naught obvious أكبر أو تساوي f x for all x in the domain of the function of x. And we say consider an interval in the domain of the function f and a point x naught in that interval. We say f has an absolute minimum إذا تحقق هذا الشرط. if x not أقل أو تساوي if x for all x in the interval. مثل هاي البوينت if A أقل أو تساوي if x for all x in the domain if x. not لما نحكي f has an absolute extremum، كلمة absolute extremum تعني at x naught that mean if it has either an absolute maximum or an absolute minimum at that point. So if we ask to find the absolute extremum, that means to find the absolute maximum or absolute minimum. If a function f is continuous on a closed interval, then f has both an absolute extremum. يعني إذا كان الاقتران، لاحظ هذا الاقتران لما عرفنا هذا الفانكشن، this function has no max and no minimum. لكن when we define the function on a closed interval and continuous يجب أن يكون له absolute extremum إما max or minimum. فلاحظ هذا الفانكشن has absolute minimum and absolute maximum. لكن this function no max and no minimum لما كان معرف على R not closed interval. Okay. This function f of x is continuous on R. Now, if you want to find limit of x as x approaches infinity, obvious from the graph, as x approaches infinity, this graph approaches infinity. And limit f of x as x approaches minus infinity, look to the graph. As x approaches minus infinity, this function has absolute max or minimum if the behavior of the function goes to infinity as x approaches infinity and x approaches minus infinity. Obvious from the graph, f of x has absolute minimum. لاحظ الابسوليوت minimum هاي النقطة x naught, so the absolute minimum occurs at the point x naught f of x naught. Okay. If we take the function f of x, our function g of x, obvious the function g of x is continuous on R. This function is continuous on R. Now, find limit g x as x approaches infinity. As x approaches infinity, the graph approaches minus infinity. And the limit of g of x as x approaches minus infinity, the graph approaches minus infinity. In this case, the function has absolute max or minimum. لاحظ على الجراف. The function so إذا كان البيهيفير للفانكشن عند الانفينيتي والماينس انفينيتي البيهيفير إله عم بيروح للماينس انفينيتي, that mean if x has absolute max or minimum, has absolute max. وأكيد هاي absolute max occurs at the critical point. Now, if we take this function f of x, what is the limit f of x as x approaches infinity? Obvious, it is infinity. And limit f of x as x approaches minus infinity minus infinity. هل هذا الفانكشن has absolute max and minimum? No. So the behavior of the function عم بيروح مرة للإنفينيتي ومرة للماينس إنفينيتي, رح نستنتج إنه f of x has no absolute max ومينيمم. ونفس الإشي النمبر 4, الليمت as x approaches infinity عم بيروح للماينس infinity, وعند minus infinity عم بروح للinfinity has no absolute max و minimum، لكن قد يكون له local. يعني لو هذا الجراف رسمت for في draw a function لاحظ هذا الفانكشن limit f x as x approaches infinity، واضح انه عم بيروح للinfinity، and limit f x as x approaches minus infinity برضو عم بيروح limit f x as x approaches infinity minus and limit f x as x approaches minus infinity infinity. This function has no absolute extremum. لكن هل هذا الفانكشن has a local max or a local minimum؟ واضح انه this point is local max. So as x approaches infinity, look, obviously graph approaches minus infinity, and as x approaches minus infinity, the graph approaches infinity, so no absolute. Our question now, how to find the absolute extrema? That means how to find the absolute maximum and minimum for the function. نفس procedure to find the local max, find the critical points. لكن you must find the image for the critical point. The largest one, it will be absolute max. والsmallest اللي صورتها بتكون أقل إشي رح تكون absolute minimum. So for example, find the absolute maximum and minimum of f(x) for x squared minus 12x plus 10 on the closed interval 1, 2. First of all, find the critical point. F prime x equal a at x minus 12 equals 0. So we get 8x equal 12. So x equal 12 over 8. So this is equal divided by لو قسمت 12 على 4 3 8 divided by 4 2. So we want to study the sign for f prime, so we have the critical point 1 3 over 2 2. So this is the sign for f prime of x. If you choose number between 1 and 3 over 2 like 1.2 and you substitute in f prime, you get the sign negative. And if you choose number between 3 over 2 and 2, the sign it will be positive. That means the function decreasing, increasing. So the minimum value ورح تكون absolute, the minimum value at the minimum value رح تكون هي عبارة عن the minimum value is f 3 over 2. هاي أصغر قيمة للاقتران وهي the absolute minimum. F 3 over 2 we substitute in the function 4 times 9 over 4 minus 12 3 over 2 plus 10. So this is equal 9 minus plus 10. So this is equal 1. So the minimum value for the function is 1. And the minimum value occurs at which point? The minimum value at which point? At the point 3 over 2 and 1. Now, we have the maximum value for the function fl1 and fl2. The largest one, it will be absolute, but fl1, find fl1. So the maximum value is FL1. FL1 equal 4 minus 12 plus 10. So 4 minus 12 minus 8 plus 10, 2. And the maximum value F2, 4 times 4 minus 12 times 4 plus 10. So this is equivalent to minus 48 plus 10. So we substitute F2 in the function. 4 times 4 minus 12. Sorry, instead of 4 here 2. Okay. So this is equal minus 24 plus 10. So this is equal to so the maximum value for the function is 2 and it will be occurs at x equals, so the maximum value for the function 2 at which point at x equal 1 and at x equal 2, at x equal 1 and x equal 2. Another example, if x equal x minus 2 to the power 3 on the interval 1, 4. Now find f prime x. F prime x equal 3x minus 2 square. So x equal 2 is a critical number for the function of x. Now we want to study the sign for f prime. Find the critical points 1, 4, 2. Obvious إنه الساين ل f prime always positive. So the function increasing. So the minimum value of FLX is FL1. And FL1 equal 1 minus 2 to the power 3 equal minus 1. And what is the maximum value? The max لاحظ الفانكشن is continuous on a closed interval. أكيد حيكون له max و minimum. لكن لو كان هذا الفانكشن defined on R, no max and no minimum. Now, what is FL4? FL4 equal 4 minus 2 to the power 3. This is equal 4 minus 2, 2 إلى القوة 3, 8. So, the maximum value for the function is 8. And the minimum value is minus 1. If we define FLX x minus 2 sin x on the interval minus pi over 4 and pi over 2. أكيد this function is continuous on a closed interval. It must be so FLX has absolute extremum. That means has absolute max and minimum. To find the absolute extremum, f prime x differentiate the derivative of x 1 minus 2. What is the derivative for sine x? Cosine x. To find the critical points equal 0, so 1 equal 2 cosine x, so cosine x equal 1/2. That means x equal cosine inverse 1/2 here x equal pi over 3. To study the sign for f prime x minus pi over 4, pi over 3 will pi over 2 are a critical point. If you choose number between minus pi over 4 and pi over 3, like 0, cosine is 0, 1, so the sign negative. That means the function decreasing. If you choose angle between pi over 3 and pi over 2, we get the sign positive. So, the minimum value for this function, the minimum value for f x is, ما هي minimum value is f pi over 3. F pi over 3 you substitute in the function f x. So f pi over 3 equal pi over 3 minus 2 sine pi over 3. So this equivalent to pi over 3 minus 2 ساين الباي over 3 اللي هي الزاوية 60 والساين إلها اللي هي the square root of 3 over 2. So this equivalent to pi over 3 minus the square root of 3. Now the maximum value f minus pi over 4 will f pi over 2 وال largest one هي بتكون absolute. Now find f minus pi over 4. رح نعوض minus pi over 4 minus 2 sine minus pi over 4. So this is equivalent to minus pi over 4 minus 2 sine minus pi over 4 minus 1 over the square root of 2. So this is equal minus pi over 4 plus 2 over the square root of 2 اللي هي عبارة عن 2 over the square root of 2 equivalent لو كتبناها minus pi over 4 plus. Now find f pi over 2. f pi over 2 equal pi over 2 minus 2 sine الباي over 2 اللي هو equal 1. سؤال: what is the maximum value? This point, the maximum value for the function, this one or this one. فكر which one you can choose. So the maximum value نحكي the maximum value for f x is هينا الجواب A and B. Now if we define f x equal x minus 2 to the power 3. السؤال: f x has A absolute max, B absolute minimum, no absolute extremum. No absolute extremum. Maybe إنك تفكر تحله وتشوف هل إله absolute max or minimum. But this function continuous on R. لو حاولنا ندرس البيهيفير للفانكشن عند الانفينيتي والماينس انفينيتي. Limit x approaches infinity as for x minus 2 to the power 3. واضح إنه limit equal infinity لأنه حيسلك أعلى power, and the limit x approaches minus infinity for x minus 2 to the power 3 equal minus infinity. That means has no absolute max or minimum. فبدون أنا ما أحل وأشتق لو كان عندي polynomial أو function continuous على R بإمكاننا نستنتج إنه هل إله absolute max or minimum. لكن this function لما عرفناه in example 2 on a closed interval it has absolute max and absolute minimum. ولو فكرت إنك to find f prime, this function always increasing, so and it has a critical point, but at this critical point no max and no minimum. Now let f x equal x square plus bx plus q. Find bq such that أعطانا شرط f1 equal 3. شو معنى f1 equal 3؟ رح أكون معادلة إنه 3 equal 1 plus b plus q. فهاي المعادلة b plus q equal 2. في عنا 2 parameter unknown, so you need 2 equation. is an extreme value، معناته كونها extreme يجب أن تكون critical point. فمن هذا الشرط بستنتج إنه f prime عند نقطة 1 equal 0. That mean f prime ال x equal 2x plus b. معناته المعادلة الثانية رح تكون عبارة عن 2x f prime لل1 equal 0. So f prime lل1 equal 0. So we get 2 plus b equal 0. So we get the value of b equal minus 2. So b equal minus 2. Find the q. Minus 2 plus q equal 2. So we get the value for q equal 4. Now, homework. If x equal x square over x square plus 1, واضح إنه هذا الفانكشن الدومين إله r, then the absolute maximum of f on the interval minus 1 2 is, وأعطيتك خيارات. The answer I think 4 over 5, but check. Okay. If x equal x minus 2x to the power 4, then f has absolute max or absolute minimum. قبل ما أحل ونطلع الكريتيكال بوينت من البيهيفير للفانكشن بإمكاننا نستنتج إنه إله absolute max or minimum. So the limit as x approaches infinity, x minus 2x to the power 4 equal minus infinity. And the limit as x approaches minus infinity, x minus 2x to the power 4 equal minus infinity. أكيد الفانكشن حيكون له absolute max or minimum. لاحظ إنه البيهيفير للفانكشن عم بروح من الطرفين للماينس infinity. أكيد شو رح يكون له absolute max. إذن أكيد f x has, how to find the absolute max for the function. So أكيد حنختار الجواب. لو سألتك سؤال find the maximum value for this function، أو ما هي البوينتس اللي بيكون عندها الاقتران absolute maximum. So find the absolute extremum for x. شو رح تعمل؟ find بدك تشتق f prime، هذا polynomial. فأول خطوة find f prime ال x 1 minus 8x to the power 3 equal 0، وكمل الحل. So in this lecture you must be able، نهاية محاضرتنا اليوم، you must be able إنك تقدر تفهم what do we mean about absolute max and minimum. والسؤال الثاني إنه how to find the absolute extremum for a function.